As challenges to the planet's health evolve, so do the people working to protect it. On the First Coast, the mission has been picked up by young, persistent, and social media savvy advocates. Here to tell us about it, we're joined by Rhiley K. Hodges, founder of Watered Down. Good morning, Rhiley.
Good morning.
Ryan Worthington, Florida master naturalist and environmental advocate. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning.
Tiffany Bess, sustainability, education, and outreach specialist with the city of Jacksonville and founder of Apple Rabbit Compost. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good morning.
And Jimmy Orth, executive director of the St. John's Riverkeeper. Good morning, Jimmy.
Good morning.
So, Jimmy, you've actually been with your organization for 20 years. So, you're not a kid, but you have really focused on bringing young people into the movement. That is sort of your mission in a lot of ways. Why is that necessary?
Well, for one, we're getting old. Some of us old guard environmentalists, we've been around a long time, but I think what I'm seeing and I'm excited about is the younger people I'm seeing that are doing it maybe in different ways, like using social media as a platform to really engage more people in this process. So I'm learning actually a lot from the folks here at the table about how to do this work. Sometimes the traditional ways of approaching environmentalism, they're just not working anymore. And we've got to bring new people to the table. We need to build a really strong, young, youthful, diverse coalition of advocates for our river and for our environment. So I'm excited to be here to talk about this because it's also kind of a time when I'm getting older. I hope I'm not doing this forever, and I'm ready to pass the baton on at some point too.
And when you say that sometimes the older ways of doing things are not working, I'm interested in that. I mean, often the movement is a little bit older. But it also has more time, perhaps more resources than younger people do. And so what is not working about the old way of doing things?
Well, I think, it was interesting when you and I have worked together for a long time. When I started working for St. John's Riverkeeper over 21 years ago, we would work with the media, the Times Union, with the Folio when you were there. We relied a lot on the media to get the word out about the work that we were doing. Traditional media, the news stations, they're still relevant, but we're not getting as many people are not hearing the message. They're not getting involved in those ways. And so we're having to rely more on social media and other ways, other types of programming to get people involved as well. And so that's what they're doing, is really bringing people to the table that maybe didn't even think of themselves as environmentalists before too.
Yeah.
And that's something too, is we want people because I think all of us at heart are environmentalists, even if we call ourselves that or not.
Rhiley, I want to ask you about your creation, Watered Down, which is on YouTube. It's a series of interviews with people in environmental activism, sometimes in environmental jobs. How did you choose to start that interview series? What made you want to begin that?
So it's a compilation of things. I started in 2021. I was in undergrad at UCF, and I realized through my studies that a lot of people knew what climate change was, but they didn't know the environmental issues that fed into it, right? So when you see it on the news, it's like this big thing. And I said, people don't understand it. Let's water that down. Let's break it down. So that's where the name came from. But I think I just started talking with people. It was also during the time of COVID, so I couldn't talk with people in person, but it was like a burning desire, like this information has to get out there. So I reached out to, the first person was fast fashion. That was our first topic. I reached out to an owner of a secondhand, she used material to make bags. And I'm like, let's talk about fast fashion. And that was a big success. I didn't realize people were into that information, or just that they were interested but didn't know how to tap into that type of field. So after that, it just kept going. I've talked to land conservationists, public officials. Our recent talk I did with Luke Runyon. He's also the director of Thirst Gap, How to Live with Less on the Colorado River. So there's, water management issues happening out there. Just kind of reaching out to people. So I think that's how it started. Yeah.
And so we're talking about how to bring people into the movement. What was it that brought you into the movement? Was there a single thing that sparked your interest?
I started my undergraduate studies as a biology major, and I was like, I do not want to know about the anatomy of a plant. But I took a class called ethnobotany, and I loved the relationship humans had with the environment. So I said, okay, let's shift. So I shifted. Um, After that, it just was like a ripple effect. I got offered the role to be a conservation scholar for Doris Duke Conservation Scholarship Program at the University of Washington. So it just kind of kept going from there, working with the Trust for Public Land, and it just took a life of its own.
In terms of formative experiences, Ryan Worthington, you grew up very much in the mix of an environmental landscape. Your father was a park ranger here in Florida, and so you really had very early experiences, kind of deep and intimate experiences with the wild places of Florida. How did that impact you growing up?
Oh, it was pretty significant because I did grow up in a variety of Florida state parks, and some of them are remote, so you don't have neighborhood kids to play with. So it's really getting out there and exploring, swimming in any body of water I could find, checking out the animals and everything else. And it becomes very foundational. And so, as I grew older and, had a career and everything else, when I returned to exploring Florida a lot more in my free time, I got to compare what I'm seeing now versus then. And it kind of bothered me a little bit, shifted me towards activism. But yeah, it was very foundational, just enjoying the springs and the little Talbot, the beaches there and the lakes. It was a wonderful childhood.
And you have a really, heavy, abundant presence on Instagram. You post a lot of videos, and it's a really interesting mix that I'm curious how you have gone about achieving. Some of it is just absolutely adorable videos of armadillos and otters in the wild, and it's got kind of this whimsical music to it, And then some of them are really sort of dense and intense, or teaching people about complicated issues, talking about policy changes that are changing the landscape of Florida. So how do you strike that balance? And what is it that you're trying? Who are you speaking to?
I wish I could say there was like a real strategy behind it, but it's mostly, I do spend a lot of time, road tripping around Florida from the Keys to the Panhandle, just really enjoying it. And I always have my camera phone out and recording things. So things I find interesting, I like to share it. But at the same time, I want folks to know, hey, this is really worth protecting. Florida has so many amazing things, like I'm used to the tannic swamps of like Northeast Florida, but when I was in the Everglades, it's crystal clear. You'll be in cypress trees, and you'll look through and the water's clear like spring-like. But, one thing that I just remember clearly is how the springs were when I was a kid. They had some algae in them, but it wasn't like what it is now. And so I saw this deterioration, and as I kind of followed the breadcrumbs, a lot of it was policy or, could be a lack of enforcement. And then I realized, hey, we got to do something about this because it's not getting better, it's getting worse.
And so I think out of, all of the projects, yours really speaks, Tiffany, to a very local solution. The Apple Rabbit Compost is a local food scrap composting business. And we've talked to you about it on this program before, but I'm curious because, Ryan's talking about, well, we've got to do something about this. And I'm curious for you and for the people in your peer group, how we have to do something becomes like, I have to do something, and how you get there.
So I think when Rhiley said that she had like a burning desire to do what she's doing, that resonated with me because that's essentially how I started Apple Rabbit Compost. So when my eyes finally opened up to how much waste we're really producing, it was hard to turn my head from that. And then I just saw it everywhere. And so once you see it everywhere, it's there. It's in your face. You can't look away. And I was reaching for somebody else to be able to do the work, doing a lot of research. Where can I take all this food waste? What can I do with it? And when I saw that there wasn't anything in Jacksonville, for a brief moment, I was a little dejected. Um, but that burning desire never went away. And so rather than waiting for somebody else to do it, I just decided, like, why wait? I can do it myself. So that's when I fell into a rabbit hole to see what it would take to do the work. And then I did it.
And how many years have you been in business now?
It'll be 10 years in March.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so your path has been both through sort of methods and routes that you've created for yourself, but also you've worked through official channels. You work for the city of Jacksonville with sustainability and outreach. You've served on the Soil and Water Conservation Board with the city of Jacksonville. How do those experiences compare?
I love doing this work. I like to say that I have like a servant's heart. Whatever I can do to volunteer and to put my efforts behind what I'm passionate about, like I'm going to do it. And so all of the volunteer work that I've done leading up to my position with the city has been wonderful, and it's been stepping stones to get me to where I am. And I've built a lot of connections with a lot of different people. Working with the Soil and Water Conservation District, it's a nonpartisan position. So you meet lots and lots of people across all avenues, all demographics, walks of life, and all sorts of different organizations too within the sustainability and environmental ecology sphere. And then now with my new role with the city of Jacksonville, it's a new position. I just started about a month ago. But I'm utilizing all these lessons and connections that I've gathered over this last decade of work to further this sustainability education within the city.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about youth activism and optimism in the face of daunting environmental challenges. If you'd like to join our conversation or if you have questions for our panelists, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. Jimmy, I want to ask you, I mean, there are a lot of issues that the Riverkeeper tackles, whether it's legislative issues dealing with the Federal Clean Water Act, climate change, pollution of all kinds. And yet there are really kind of micro issues that you are also tackling. And litter, I think, might surprise people as one of them, because that seems like, well, that's a pretty small scale concern. But it is not really. I mean, it really does have big impacts. Can you talk about why it impacts the place people live and what you've learned recently about how much the city spends or doesn't spend on kind of taking care of that problem?
Yeah, litter's a huge problem. Matter of fact, when I took this job over 21 years ago, I never thought of litter as being one of the top threats to the health of the river. I thought it was more aesthetic. Yes, there's some concerns for wildlife.
Or polluters.
Right. But the more you learn, it is a serious problem. One, as these especially as we have so many plastics now, as these plastics break down in the environment, they can become microplastics, which we all have in our bodies, unfortunately, can be ingested by wildlife. They can become choking hazards for wildlife. They also release a ton of chemicals that are really dangerous to the health of and harmful to the health of the waterways and to wildlife. So they're really a huge problem. And once they get in the waterways, trash and litter, it's really hard to get it out because, one, we don't have agencies that take responsibility for removing it. So it's really up to the citizens. Once it's there, it's our responsibility to remove it.
There is no agency to clean up the river bottom or the river.
Once it's in the water. So that's part of the problem too, is it's really hard to remove, and then it starts breaking down. And so it's a huge problem. It's not just an environmental issue either. It affects property values when you have litter and trash in neighborhoods. It affects tourism. So it's an economic issue. It's a human health issue. They can actually be, it can be a pathway for pathogens and things like that. So it's a big problem, and unfortunately, and we all know it exists. We drive around Jacksonville, you see, I was driving here on my way here, just noticing how much trash there is along our roadways. And fortunately, in Jacksonville, we don't spend a lot of money on removing trash. And so that's one thing the mayor has tried and advocated to the city council to try to get some more funding. Unfortunately, city council did not approve it. But I think that's something we've got to make sure that there's more funding and effort behind it, because it's a big problem. I'll say, too, that speaking of young people, what's really exciting, too, is we have a young professionals group called Rising Tides. And a good example is, I think trash and cleanups, which we do a lot of, are a great way to get people involved in environmental issues, because it's something you can go out and you can see the impact of a couple of hours you put in cleaning up. And so it's been fun. So they've actually, for 12 years now, every month they go and clean up a section of McCoy's Creek. I mean, every single month. And that just to me says a lot about the resolve and the commitment of younger people to roll their sleeves up, get involved like these folks here around the table, and they're not giving up. And they continue. I even am a bit amazed. I'm like, I think I would have given up after 10 years cleaning up the same waterway and continued to come back and see trash each month. But it just demonstrates what I think makes me excited, and what is one of the reasons we have to get more young people involved. It's because environmental issues are a top concern. Look at polling. Climate change, for one, is oftentimes one of the top issues for young voters. And yet they're not often at the table with these larger environmental groups or where decisions are being made. And so we've got to create platforms for folks to get involved. And we're fortunate to have the folks here around this table that are really doing that successfully in Jacksonville.
I just want to, on the funding issue, make sure that we are clear, because you have found that the solid waste division, which is basically the litter crews, they contract with cleanup crews, that several years ago, that budget was about $2 million, and there was 12 or 13 people employed for that purpose. Now that budget is $250,000, and there's just 2 crews. And so the ability to clean up the city is just greatly diminished. And as you say, the effort to put more money back into the budget for that did not make it through the budget process.
Right. And yes, and that was 10, 12 years ago that we were spending $2 million a year. And you think about how much Jacksonville's grown since then too.
Yeah.
So we're spending a fraction of what we were. And what's happened is that puts the onus on the volunteers and the citizens to be the ones that go out and clean it up. I think, to the mayor's credit, she's trying to address this problem and tried to get more funding. But we've got to get our city council to also step up and take responsibility. I think we can do more with volunteers, but it can't just be on the backs of volunteers to resolve this problem. Our local government has to be involved and play a bigger role in that.
Rhiley, I sort of led with the idea of something called imperfect environmentalism, which is something that seems to be a strategy to, I mean, it's an idea that's based in social science, but a way of getting people to see themselves as part of a continuum instead of somebody that has to solve the problem all by themselves. And so there's sort of this increasing movement, particularly to try to bring young people into the movement, saying, you don't have to be a perfect vegan, but you can work at it. You don't have to be a perfect plastics-free person, but you can try. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about how strategies like that work with younger people in terms of, because the problem is so large, it does seem like can be just off-putting.
Yeah. I think that's very impactful for my generation. Like off of what Jimmy said, of just, putting it back on local government and, our public officials of, hey, like, this is something that's something that is important to us, right? And I think when you think of imperfect environmentalism, I think people think that they have to be this big, this big official or big leader in the community, where it's like, okay, I have the resources to do things, so on Watered Down, I say, okay, here are things that you can do, right? I feel like if everybody does something small, it can be really impactful, right? So maybe not you're a vegan the whole time, but maybe you have Meatless Monday, right? So you're doing something, and then if everybody's contributing to it, it's a more impactful. But if it's just a small collective doing a little bit, then it's not as impactful what it could be if everybody's doing something.
Yeah. Ryan, one issue that you have made a bit of a campaign on your site is a Senate bill that was approved this last summer by the legislature. And it's something that local governments are currently wrestling with. It has to do with development codes and essentially what they can or can't change. A lot of cities, counties right now are finding that their comprehensive planning is getting rejected at the state level. It's creating a lot of confusion. What can you tell us about Senate Bill, is it 180?
Yes, that's it. It was titled Emergencies, and it was sold as a hurricane relief bill, basically allowing folks to make it easier for them to rebuild, probably following a disaster. But the language in it really favored development, and it's loosely worded. There's a term in there that if any kind of laws or rules or anything that makes development more restrictive or burdensome, and that's really left up to the beholder, then they can challenge it. And that is what's happening. So it could be comprehensive plans, zoning, impact fee increases, or if a local government is trying to protect rural lands or wetlands, they're meeting these challenges, and it's going, all the way up to the Capitol, and it's creating havoc. I think it's going to be a problem that we don't see right away, but as local governments are encountering these obstacles, it's going to be a significant problem. We have the legislative session that's starting in early January, and it's a great time to amend that bill and to get that language out of there, return it to be like a hurricane relief bill, and then return the power back to the local governments, the counties and the cities, so they can manage their development better. And truly, you want the local citizens having a say what's going on in their local counties and governments and everything else.
Jimmy, it's a balance, especially places that have been impacted by a major storm. You want people to be able to rebuild and to find, get their home back in order. But there is also this, countervailing pressure that says sometimes we need to make changes to the way that we have built, whether it's creating, buildings that are higher off the ground or further back from waterways. And it can be very hard post-crisis to tell people, well, you need to invest more, or you need to, create a structure that's more resilient when they're just trying to make ends meet.
Yeah, it can be really hard, but at the same time, we put ourselves and make our lives much more challenging down the road. If we don't build sustainably, we're not building smart, we're not in a smart way, avoiding building in floodplains and things like that, and building, with sustainable practices, it's going to come back, and we're going to see it's going to be more problems for our community down the road. So I think it's an investment in the future. And that's what we have to look at, is that we're trying to build more resilient communities. And sometimes we can't look past that just because we're trying to rebuild quickly after a disaster. Because our state is facing literally a crisis in our state with in terms of the threats from climate change and from future storms. And so we can't allow that to be an excuse not to do it the right way.
Yeah. Tiffany, I want to ask you just a little bit about climate anxiety, because that's something that can be really overwhelming. We know that a study that was published in The Lancet and is posted on the NIH website says that almost 60% of people between the ages of 16 and 25, so 59% of people in that age group, are worried or extremely worried about climate catastrophe, about, impending, environmental doom in some way or another. How do you talk constructively about these issues? How do you keep your chin up when you're working towards environmental solutions on any scale, small or large?
What a great question. Very heavy too. I have a bit of anxiety just in general, and it is exasperated when it comes to climate concerns. I think that that's ultimately why I started volunteering for so many different organizations, is because there's not much I feel like I can do on a big, large scale. So I kind of withdraw into my local community instead, and just kind of focus on the effects that I can have immediately outside of me and my home. And so keeping it hyper local has been the best way that I found to kind of combat that anxiety. And so going into like what Rhiley was saying, being like an imperfect environmentalist, just doing what I can where I can, and advocating and educating other people in hopes that it will have that ripple effect and that more people will do it. And so I feel like that kind of helps quell and calm those nerves to some extent. But it is really hard. It is very hard to deal with. And I applaud all the people in this environmental sphere for doing the work that they do, because it can get overwhelming, but everyone's doing the best that they can. And I appreciate you all so much.
Rhiley, I'd get your thoughts on that as well. I know that people of my generation started, learning about the environment at a point where the challenges were seemingly much more manageable. Things like, point source pollution, whether a factory was dumping into water or not. Um, you know, deforestation, which is still happening on a large scale, but things like a warming planet are kind of on a whole different level. And those really weren't things that I feel like, I learned about as a young person. But you've grown up knowing these things. How does that shape how you think about the future? How does it shape how you approach your environmental work?
I think you look at it as, okay, this is something that is not going away. With the climate anxiety, I think about how nature works, right? Nature is it teaches you how to rest, right? So in those moments where you feel like this is too much or this is a lot, lots going on in the climate realm. And that happens to me all the time. You get burnout, but then I am reminded that nature has seasons, right? There's a spring, there's an autumn, there's a winter, and those seasons kind of delve into how you exert your energy, right? So that's kind of how I think of it. As a young person, this is an issue that I feel we're going to be tackling for a few more decades, probably. So you can't try to eat the whole sandwich. You got to take bits and pieces.
Yeah. I just have a question, I think, for all of you, what your thoughts are. I feel like a lot of the energy that maybe previously would have been spent on thinking about environmental things is very often channeled now to quote unquote wellness. And so people take a very close look at their own health and nutrition and personal practices, and perhaps focus a little less on things like, the way things are made, or pollution, or biodiversity, but that they're kind of trying to solve those problems in a much more kind of individual way. Do you think that that is challenging for the movement writ large? I mean, do you think that it makes it distracts attention, focus, passion?
That is a very good question, actually. I think anything that we do, there's obviously going to be a balance, right? I think that right now with the internet and smartphones, we have an amazing amount of tools to see what our impact really is. So yeah, if we lean, I think, too much in any direction, it can be a challenge. But have I seen that in the work I do in activism? I haven't seen anything really definitive where I see that clearly impacting it. But yeah, I think it's basically looking at our world around us and ourselves, and then making the best decisions there.
Ryan, I'll start with you. But if there was one thing that you could ask people just briefly to do, having heard the work that you do, what would you like them to do? I'm going to ask everybody, but
one thing is, I used to be very hopeless when I saw, some of this development harming our environment and, the deterioration of some of our habitats around Florida. But knowing that we can make a difference, like with the Florida State Park development fiasco we saw a little over a year ago, folks really got animated about it and they made a change. I mean, those plans got shelved in a week, right? So everybody saw that when they contacted their elected officials, when they got out and did some demonstrations and rallies that, in a very peaceful, responsible manner, that, that makes an impact. And that's what I want folks to know. You see something. We have a process. It's not always perfect, but when we do have victories, celebrate them. And when things don't go our way, learn from it and then move on, because there's always going to be something right around the corner.
Your thoughts, Rhiley?
Get outside. I think people have, there's a disconnection between people and place, right? I think if people go outside more and actually experience nature, the springs that you talk about, the walkways, our Emerald Green Trail that we just enacted. I think if people actually get outside and take in nature, they'll see how beautiful it is, and they'll create this sense of stewardship of, I need to take care of this.
Tiffany?
Support the people that are doing the work, get behind them, support their causes, volunteer where you can, and yeah, just do the work. Like, we got to do the work. We can't avoid it. We can't put our head in the sand. Like, we have to get out there and get our hands a little dirty sometimes.
Jimmy?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what they said. I think we really have to. People need to realize that they can make a difference. Like Ryan said, I think that sometimes we feel like it's not worth it. My voice doesn't matter, but it does. It can. And and what we realized with the parks issue too is that it a nonpartisan issue. People across the board. So in this partisan environment we're in, that really demonstrated that some of these issues everybody cares about. This is not a partisan issue. And the same is like with climate change. I think, with climate change, a lot of people don't realize that their friends and family probably are concerned about it too. Polling shows that people think other people don't care like they do, so they don't talk about it. So we've got to talk about these issues. We have to find community, because that's what people ultimately need too, is to know that they're in this with other people, and they are. And so that's one of the things I'm hoping is through this dialogue, we can try to bring more people into the conversation, and then we'll end up seeing more action as a result.
Well, Jimmy Orth, Ryan Worthington, Tiffany Bess, Rhiley K. Hodges, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Loved it.